English translation. 230th Contact. Part 1. Wednesday, 11th October 1989, 04:01 hours.
Nice, my friend, that you are back again. Be welcome and greeted. It was a long time.
But you knew I would be gone for 2 months.
I knew that, yes. But it had been almost 2.5 months to now. Never mind. Can you today again tell me something about prophecies or predictions of the old prophets?
Certainly, because I have made an effort to still bring something more. However, once again it is not a matter of prophecy, but of a prediction, which this time also goes back to the prophet Jeremiah, and is mainly about you, along with little else. I also had to translate his ancient words into today's German language so that it would be understood. So listen to what he had to say. As proclaimer of this world, I see and hear and know what will come about in very distant days. It will be in the centuries when the proclaimer of the new time will raise his word and teach the world, and thereby cause great turmoil, and his life will be endangered by it. I see and hear and know because my eyes and ears are open, and see and hear in the firmament what will be in the distant days to come. As if with a big step, I traverse the days with my eyes and ears into the distant time, all the way to a free country, to a place of which you know nothing yet and which you cannot yet see. Over there will be the bravest of the brave, the most dignified of the dignified ones, and he will teach with might and proclaim the laws and recommendations of the creation. And like me, he will be a scribe and will be able to listen to the firmament, and he will be the eye, the ear, and the conscience of human beings, and he will make human beings see the powers of the creation and hear its laws. He will be a seer and a knowledgeable one, and a mediator, whose hand will write down the voices of those who will come from the stars. And he will be the third continuation of mine, and a continuation in the reliving of those proclaimers who were me beforehand. His word will reveal the hidden structure of the world and many a secret of the creation. And he will fill gaps of memory that lead from a point in the past or from the present to the future. So he will show the map on which the events taking place, due to the human being, mark the new time. The new proclaimer will have to endure much suffering, and the father will be a simple shoemaker, and the mother a simple woman who will bear 3 sons and 4 daughters in all. One of the sons will be called the guardian of the treasure, and will be the new proclaimer. The knowledge of the laws of the creation will be open to him like never before to a proclaimer. And it will be him who will again bring to light the true teaching and the true words of the ancient proclaimers and make them accessible to the human beings. Until then, the texts of the proclamations, the teachings, and the words of mine and mine after mine and mine before mine wait in hidden waiting for the appropriate moment, when they shall emerge again during the days of the new proclaimer, brought forth by the human beings from the firmaments. And the proclaimer will wait for the right day on the Horseshoe Mountain, where he will have his residence, and where the cloth which is the sign of the alliance with the human beings from the firmaments will flutter in the wind. And when the time has come, then he will proclaim the ancient words, and his site will be a place where the human beings from all 4 winds of the earth will find each other. And his true ones will be from the firmaments and enter and leave his home, and still will not be seen by the human beings because they remain hidden and have a head not compatible with the heads of the human beings of the earth. The new proclaimer in the distant days will be the founder of the group of the truth, and it will expand into all 4 winds of the earth. He will break the seal of many secrets of the creation and of the head of the human being as well as there. thoughts, and feelings, and will be more knowledgeable about them than any other human being at that time or earlier. His number will be the 1 and the 3 and the 7, and hence the number of the knowledgeable and the wise. He will travel far, to the place where the firmaments and the earth meet, and where the firmaments end. His words will be the words of the truth, and they will be hard and hit the human beings in their heads. And he will be restless in his doing, and he will be active when he lies on the ground, when he walks in the dark night or in the bright light of the moon, when he walks through the desert or climbs the mountains, and he will let himself be permeated by the powers of the stars, by the sun, and by the earth. He will embed his mighty powers like flowing streams in his words, and write them down like no proclaimer ever before him, so that they may be preserved for all days. His words will be comfort to the righteous and drenched in love, and they will also reach the unrighteous, and rattle and shake them, and they will enter them like mighty currents, and little by little awaken them. His words will also enter deep into the firmaments, and reach the human beings in the firmaments, and they will permeate the stars with their power. And his words will reach the place where the firmaments and earth meet, and where the firmaments end. His knowledge will be that he knows the head and the thoughts and feelings of all human beings, their intellect and rationality, and he will know the body of the earth and the stars and the firmament, because he will follow the paths that lead to the secrets in these worlds. The new proclaimer will one day be the third successor of mine, and thus he will be able to heal, and he will join the ancient lineage of mine over Josiah, Jeremiah, Enoch, Henoch, and Nocodemian, the originators of the knowledge and the wisdom, which all are not divided in their spirit, and have never let their senses dull in their heads, as human beings do in the present time and will do even more drastically in the new time of the new proclaimer, whereby they create an artificial ununderstanding between cognition and knowledge, between lies and truth, between prediction and prophecy, between inspiration and inner view, between love and behaving in a sexually immoral and unseemly wise, between peace and war, between the essence of wisdom and imagination, between delusion and reality. The new proclaimer will read many dignified books, go into the mountains and forests and into the desert in ever-recurring times of loneliness, to learn and indulge in contemplation. And he will join many cults that worship deities, angels, and saints to explore their secrets and erroneous teachings. And he will also explore the secret regulation of the world and of the time. And he will build a place of tranquility, of contemplation, of love and peace on the Horseshoe Mountain, where all the dignified and truthly currents will flow together, which have passed through human beings since times. The site becomes an authentic and symbolic center for the earth and for the firmament, because in it the powers of the spirit and the head flow together, and in it an impressive accumulation of truthly knowledge, of truthly love, and of freedom, and of peace, and of harmony, and of the essence of wisdom accumulates. So, little by little, human beings will no longer take any step without discovering and following the tracks of the true great proclaimer. And the guardian of the treasure will be called Edward, the successor of mine in the third generation, after the proclaimers Emmanuel and Mohammed, who in the first and second generation will be the successors of mine in the same spirit, but in a different head. The new proclaimer will be a great mediator and seer, and his word contains all the cognition of life, because he has opened himself to life. Many human beings will understand him, but all those who hear his word with unintellect or read or even only touch his writing with unintellect will fall into a holy horror, as if an abyss would open up in front of them. Thus many will fearfully turn away from it, and others will steal and falsify the word and the teaching of the proclaimer, in order to make usury with it and great profits from it. They will be incapable of understanding the words of the proclaimer and will therefore try to destroy it. But they will not be able to make sacrilege thereof, because the word and the teaching of the proclaimer will be too mighty. More than 22 centuries will have passed by after me when the new proclaimer begins his work. Until then, many villages and cities will be overflowing with large hordes of human beings, and an unimaginable milling mass will exist. Ancient villages and cities and the walls around them, the fortresses and the weapons, and the bones of the ancient prophets and the human beings of former times will be buried under sand and ruins, and will be excavated again in the new time as a specialty and ancient value. The days until then will have suffocated the voice and the words of mine, and the words of the wise ones and of all the prophets. And the human beings will move away from the truth and turn in faith to different cults with gods, angels and saints, but which in truth are none, because they are only inventions of the priests and self-proclaimed bringers of salvation. The belief of the cults will become law, and only few will dare to openly turn to the truth and the laws of the creation. Therefore, it will initially be only a few, however, who turn to the words and the teaching of the new proclaimer and remain true to them. There will be a huge crowd of believers from all cults around the world who will spread everywhere, and the belief of human beings that has developed in the cults will resound like a mighty blow of a thunder from one end of the world to the other. And the cults will fight each other bloodily until death and downfall, and barbarism will break out in the cults themselves, and the highest and high priests and henchmen of the cults will chase and murder the low and lowest ones of the cults, seize their goods and the gold, and get richer and richer and richer, which will also be caused by permanent exploitation, because the believers will be subject to duties and penalties through the cults, which they have to pay in gold and coins. In the new time, the human being possesses the knowledge about the great continents on the earth and the great forests behind the end of the boundless oceans. And after all the more than 2,000 years since the time of mine, in which I live, all the lands all over the earth will become great kingdoms, and empires, and mighty realms as they unite. But as numerous as the parts of an endless chain will be wars, and they will overlap each other more and more, and so the realms will fall again, and then new ones will, however, be created out of it. However, the slaves and serfs, the farmers and vine growers, and the shepherds and the poor will practice the rebellion, and thousands of times they will bring fire upon the land. They will light castles, fortresses, cities, and burn harvests. And they will do so until they are taken prisoner, and they are tortured and burned, and their skin is taken off alive, and the survivors will be forced to protect themselves again in their hiding places through concealment. And so the highest ones, high ones and their henchmen will again feel as if they were kings. But there will be progress, and when the time of more than 2 millennia will have passed, the human being will have conquered the depths of the oceans and the firmaments, and he or she will fly into the firmaments and search for a new home in it. Like a star shining in the firmament, he or she himself will be like a star in the firmaments. When he or she will have won the power of the sun and considers himself or herself to be the creation, and when he or she establishes enormous buildings and towers in the thousands on the earth, builds enormous metal ships, and with these plows through the waters of the oceans and the skies and the firmaments. And beyond the great ocean there will be new great realms, and from one of them new legions of barbarian hordes will depart under the command of mighty ones who have badly got out of the control of the good human nature to bring wars into the world, and to conquer the world, and to seize the natural resources of the lands. On the other side of the large ocean, however, the walls of the cities and villages of the invaders will collapse. Those who want to seize the authority over the world, and the realm will then be nothing but destroyed, and will be burnt land, and will be no more than muddy water. And the peoples of the earth will mix, and much evil will arise from it, and much sickness, and much infirmity, and hatred, and terror, and revenge, and many deaths. And when these days arrive, the human being will face very hard times, and he or she will stand in front of a dark entrance of an impenetrable labyrinth, shrouded in darkness, and the labyrinth will be black as the darkest night, and he or she will enter it, and in it will glow like the evil, the red and glowing eyes of ruin, and may the human being of the distant time beware of it, because the ruin will carry cruel anger and rage that has very badly got out of the control of the good human nature, and destruction and many deaths. And the days will last a long time during the ruin, but in far distance of the time then to come, everything will lighten and love, peace and freedom will arise. It will be so, because I see and hear in the firmament and know that it will be so, because I am Jeremiah the proclaimer, and I speak the truth. That is thus Jeremiah's prediction. More should not have to be said, because Jeremiah's predictions and Enoch's prophecies should suffice. I gave the latter to you on the 28th of February, 1987.
Something else. In 1978, Jacobus and I were with the dubious Hans Ulrich Lenzlinger in Hung, because Jacobus was looking for a job with him. 1 year later, Lenzlinger was shot dead, whereby it was said that the Stasi of the GDR had done it, but this could not be proven until now. Is this assumption correct? And further, on Friday the 10th of December 1976, Simyase explained to me all sorts of things about the Easter Island and its inhabitants, as well as about the stone-head colossuses. Thereby she also spoke about machines that originated from extraterrestrials. With them the colossal heads were made, transported and erected. Unfortunately, she did not describe these machines in more detail, but it would be important for us to know what kind of machines they were. She also spoke of cranes and other devices that the extraterrestrials made available to the islanders. Somehow, I find that it was irresponsible of the extraterrestrials to put their technology into the hands of such underdeveloped human beings of Earth. If I think of your directives, which forbid you to interfere in the affairs of humankind's vastly subordinate to yourselves, to even make yourselves visible in a real form, or to make contact with them, then I do not understand the actions of those extraterrestrials who allowed themselves to engage with the islanders.
The murder of the GDR escape worker Lenzlinger comes closer to being solved.
In 1979, the escape helper Hans Ulrich Lenzlinger was murdered in Zurich. There has been evidence for some time that the Stasi was complicit in the murder. Now the murderer may also have been caught in Germany. Felix E. Müller. The murder case of escape helper Hans Ulrich Lenzlinger, which has still not been definitively solved, is once again occupying the Zurich police. Karl Steiner, spokesman for the cantonal police, confirmed to the SDA news agency that the police had sent a request for information to the German Federal Criminal Police Office in the hope that it would provide clues to the perpetrator. Immediately after the murder, which shocked the quiet Zurich neighborhood of Hung on the 5th of February 1979, there was speculation about the involvement of the Stasi in the professionally executed shooting. Almost a fortnight ago, special forces of the Federal Criminal Police Office in Germany arrested a man suspected of having committed more than 24 murders on behalf of the Stasi between 1976 and 1987. This news prompted the Zurich investigators to take out the Lenzlinger file again and request more detailed information about the arrested Jürgen G. from the German authorities. As the magazine Focus now reports, apparently with success, the 53-year-old plumber, the magazine writes, is now also linked to the shooting of the Swiss escape helper. The murder of Lenzlinger moved Switzerland at the time. Lenzlinger was a dubious person and attracted attention simply because he kept 2 cheetahs as pets. He earned his lavish living with various dubious businesses, including as an escape agent. In the mid-70s, he managed to smuggle dozens of GDR citizens into the West for money. This brought him into the sights of the Stasi, which began to systematically monitor him. Extensive documents held by the Gauck authorities show that in 1975, Stasi chief Erich Mielke personally gave the order to dismantle the organization, which in Stasi jargon was called a criminal gang of human traffickers. The whole operation, which was carried out at enormous expense, went under the code name Leopard. The Stasi relied on 2 so-called unofficial collaborators IM. As the former National Councillor Ernst Kinsera found out from the Gauck authorities CNZZ of 16th and 17th October 2000, one of them was the Jordanian Tony. Since Lenzlinger's organization continued to be active after his murder, the operation was continued. A Swiss man, now 61 years old, with the code name Niklaus Meyenberg, played the key role. In 1984, the Stasi had reached its goal. In a discontinuation order, those in charge noted with satisfaction that all escape helper organizations had been smashed. The early suspicion that the Stasi had also sent out Lenzlinger's killer now seems to be confirmed after almost 20 years.
Neue Zürcher Zeitung, Zürich, Sunday, 9th Oktober 2003.
The primitive apple comes from Kazakhstan.
Almost all edible apples are classified as Malus domestica and, according to the latest findings, originate from the wild apple Malus sieversii, which is native to Kazakhstan. There, near the city of Almaty, the former name. Alma-Ata means father of apples. There is still a whole forest of wild apple trees. The trees are similar in size to modern apple trees, but mostly produce only small and inedible fruits. Since time immemorial, the great trade routes between East and West have passed by this apple forest. Along these routes, the fruits spread with the help of the traders, and thanks to the apple's own extreme adaptability, see main text. There are also wild apple trees in Switzerland. Sometimes these specimens are mistaken for trees that have grown from accidental seedlings and have grown without grafting. But genetically they are not wild apples. The correct Swiss wild apples belong to the species Malus sylvestris. According to apple researcher Simon Egger, there are still many representatives of this species in the Jura, but they have also been discovered in the Klettgau region of Schaffhausen. An amateur botanist from Kreuzlingen even told Egger about 3 trees in the Lake Constance region. One of them even had thorns. Great efforts are being made internationally to preserve wild species of cultivated plants. In Dresden-Pillnitz there is the largest collection of wild species in Europe, with trees of about 30 Malus species, including 127 subspecies of the primitive apple Malus sieversii. In Wadenswil, trials are being carried out with scab-resistant cultivated apples, the resistance of which has been bred in from the wild apple species Malus floribunda, MAM.
That clarifies that. Something else. Some time ago, we talked about the warming of the Earth, whereby you explained that in the coming time the permafrost areas would also be affected by the climate warming by gradually thawing. The mountains would also be affected, because the permafrost inside the stones and rocks would melt due to climate warming. You called the inner ground and rock frost permanent. If I remember correctly, you called it permanent frost. Permanent means always, that is to say, continuously, persistently, constantly, uninterruptedly, etc.
Heat attacks the permafrost. Mountaineers are at risk.
The June heat melted the snow in the mountains prematurely. Now the summer sun is thawing the perpetual ice. There is a threat of more rockfalls. Climbers and structures are in danger. By Helmut Stalder, Zurich. The record-hot June melted away the layer of snow early in many places in the high mountains, which in normal years covers rocks and glaciers until well into July and August. Now the summer sun is burning directly on the ground and attacking the permafrost. This is an extraordinary situation, says permafrost researcher Wilfried Heiberle from the University of Zurich. This is because the current thaw is intensifying the climate-related decline in permafrost that has been observed for a long time. Now, rock faces that were fixed by ice thousands of years old would quickly become unstable. The danger of ice breakoffs. Rockfall and rock avalanches. Alpinists are directly threatened, even on otherwise unproblematic routes, says Tony Fuchs, president of the Swiss Mountain Guide Association. Instead of firm snow and compact ground, they now often encounter bare ice and boulders. 3 climbers fell to their deaths on the Matterhorn on Sunday. On the Weissum, a Spaniard died on Monday, and a Valaisan man who had been roped in was swept away and injured. According to the Valais Cantonal Police, both accidents were caused by missteps and slipping. On Mont Blanc, a falling chunk of ice killed 3 alpinists on Monday. Tony Fuchs therefore urges climbers to find out exactly about current changes before each tour or to take a mountain guide. Drought becomes a burden. The persistent heat and drought are becoming a problem in southern Europe. In Italy, a state of emergency is threatening, and in parts of France, water consumption is being restricted. Rising prices for fruit and vegetables are the result. In Switzerland, the situation in the Central Plateau and Ticino is becoming increasingly precarious. Agriculture in particular is affected by the restrictions imposed by the authorities.
Tagesanzeiger Zurich, Tuesday, 15th July 2003.
This is of correctness. The terms I was telling you were permanent ice and permanent frost. In shortened form, they are simply called perma-ice and permafrost. In the coming time, I explained this to you before. However, also the ice masses of the glaciers as well as the Arctic and Antarctic will melt for the most part.
Poles are melting. It's getting bitterly cold here.
Milan, no way the Earth is getting warmer and warmer. The opposite is true, say researchers. It sounds absurd. Of all things, global warming could lead to a drop in temperature. This is what English researchers claim in a study they presented at the UN Climate Change Conference in Milan. The reasoning sounds plausible. Global warming is causing the ice caps at the poles to melt. The additional water masses from the Antarctic, for example, could slow down the Gulf Stream, which carries warm water to our latitudes. The consequence, the North Atlantic and the mild weather in Western Europe would cool down considerably. And that could happen soon. Only 5 more extremely warm decades, and the climate in Western Europe will topple over.
Blick Zurich, Monday, 8th December 23.
When perma-ice, that is to say permafrost, thaws, large parts of mountains can collapse, or also tundra and steppe areas can become marshy or dry. Houses can break down and power poles can fall down, etc., as well as droughts and dry seasons can occur more often. You recently also told me when you left our private conversation that during the Second World War, the Americans had concentration camps too, and namely in the Sierra Nevada, in a place called Mansana, in which several 100,000 Japanese men, women and children were interned in 1942 after Japan entered the World War, and actually under inhumane circumstances, whereby also many of the interned Japanese died miserably, because they were kept and treated like animals infected with an epidemic. These concentration camps, however, were hidden from the world public until today. Is there no possibility that something can be done to make this U.S. crime known?
The permafrost thaws under the hut.
The hot June has thawed the snow cover in the mountains early. Now the sun is burning down on the permafrost like never before. Previously safe climbing routes and structures are at risk. By Helmut Stalder. Normally at this time of year, there is still plenty of snow in the high mountains, protecting glaciers and fern from thawing. This year, however, the record hot June caused the protective layer to disappear early. Now, when the greatest solar radiation of the summer comes, rocks and glaciers lie bare, says Wilfried Haberle, professor at the Institute of Geography at the University of Zurich and a specialist in glaciers and permafrost. The sun's rays are no longer reflected. The heat penetrates deep underground and melts the eternal ice. The current thaw comes on top of global warming, which is affecting permafrost in general. This is an extraordinary situation, says Haberle. Climbing rockfall slopes, mountain guides and climbers are directly affected. Rock faces held together by the ice become unstable. Flanks where ice tours were otherwise possible are no longer accessible. Tony Fox from Visp, president of the Swiss Mountain Guide Association, is confronted with this every day on his tours. The terrain is currently very tricky. On Monday, he had to take a route on the Dufour-Spitze that he had never done before because the usual route was no longer passable. And no one expected the huge chunk that came loose on the Matterhorn the day before yesterday. Mountain guides are normally good at assessing when a route is too tricky. But it is bad with people who go without a guide, says Fuchs. They often don't check with the local office or the hut warden about the current conditions and take the traditional route or the one they know, even if the conditions have deteriorated. Fox can concretely observe the retreat of the permafrost. 10 years ago, he was still walking on fern on the famous east ridge of the Weisshom, but now the route leads over scree. Familiar entrances are no longer possible in some places. Traditional routes are changing rapidly. Instead of the expected snow, one often encounters bare ice. The decline in perpetual ice is particularly good to see at the Concordia hut. The hut warden has to nail new steps to the stairs every year because the glacier is sinking. Built on ice. When the 10 to several hundred meter thick permafrost warms up, water begins to circulate. According to Haberle, this can also cause larger rock sections to become unstable. The warmer climate and the current thaw also endanger many buildings. Large mountain stations were built on solid ground with few ice inclusions. Often the engineers have also planned very well. For example, on the Sheathorn, where they encountered a large 1-meter thick ice lens. To prevent it from melting away, heat is extracted from the subsoil, which is used to heat the station above. But, says Haberle, many outbuildings of such stations stand on poor ground, garages for snow groomers, barracks, ski huts. Some of them are heated and thus thaw their own foundations. Buildings from the time when permafrost melting was not yet an issue, such as pylons of sports lifts, paths, and communication facilities, are particularly sensitive. They were built without the ground having been properly investigated, says Haberle. Because the number of such structures has increased rapidly since the 1950s, the risk has risen sharply. Firstly, the danger of rock subsidence increases with warming. Secondly, the risk that they will not go smoothly increases. It is different whether a rock avalanche goes into an empty mountain valley or into a full reservoir, says Haberle. Nothing to see from the outside. Even though June has now increased the risk of rock falls, debris flows, and rock avalanches, Haberle does not want to spread panic. The permafrost is thawing slowly, so there is enough time to prepare for the danger and secure buildings. However, the problem is still not taken seriously enough. This may be because it is psychologically suppressed or minimized for tourism reasons or because of ignorance. Residents often believe that they can draw conclusions from the past, as they do with avalanches and white water. But that doesn't work, because permafrost melt is a new danger for which there is no empirical knowledge. Often people don't recognize imminent break-offs in time, says Haberle. How much the ground has thawed can only be measured. However, research has developed models that allow precise statements. Next week, the International Permafrost Association (IPA) will meet in Zurich to exchange results. Today we can tell each community where conditions are precarious, says IPA Vice President Haberle. However, researchers and authorities need to work more together to improve the situation in the field.
Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Tuesday, 15th July 2003.
Matterhorn closed.
Dramatic rescue operation on the Matterhorn. After a rockfall above the Hörnli hut, 90 alpinists had to be evacuated. The mountain remains closed for the time being. Zurich, Bern, Zermatt. Switzerland is increasingly suffering from the consequences of the heat wave. In the Alps, the problem of dissolving permafrost was accentuated yesterday TA of Tuesday. On the Matterhorn, 70 climbers were surprised by a rockfall that cut off their way back. After several hundred cubic meters of rock fell, the alpinists had to be rescued by Air Zermatt helicopters. Afterwards, the Mountain Guide Association closed the Matterhorn. Zermatt rescue chief Bruno Jelk blamed the heat for the rockfall, which fell 200 meters above the Hörnli hut and destroyed the classic ascent route. According to experts, the influence of the heat was less clear in the case of an ice collapse on the upper Grindelwald glacier. The ice masses, the size of several detached houses, dammed the Lütschine and triggered 3 flood waves. The authorities sounded the alarm early, so that no human beings were harmed in the Bernese Oberland either. The thawing of the perpetual ice is a new danger for which there is as yet no empirical knowledge, said Zurich geography professor Wilfried Haberle. Rock faces that had been held up by thousands of years of ice were becoming brittle. This increases the danger of ice break-offs and rockfalls.
Power industry rejoices.
The rapidly thawing snow and glacier masses are rapidly filling the reservoirs. In contrast, rivers and streams in the plains become trickles. While agriculture suffers from the drought and laments losses in the millions, the Swiss electricity industry benefits from record prices. Normally, power plants keep their reservoirs full from April to September in order to sell the electricity at a high price in winter. But the drought has now driven prices up to record highs across Europe, because air conditioning systems increase consumption and river power plants produce less. The owners of reservoirs are not missing out on this. They send the abundant meltwater over the turbines at peak times and sell the electricity expensively at home and abroad. The European trading price for electricity from Laufenburg climbed to a record 24.9 centimes per kWh in the midday peak hour yesterday. Some even higher hourly prices were achieved on the electricity exchange in Leipzig. Retier Energie in Graubünden even reported a deal for 63 centimes per kilowatt. All in all, the storage power plants can export peak electricity 3 times more expensive this summer than 3 years ago and almost twice as expensive as last winter. Swiss consumers, who are currently supplied at fixed monopoly tariffs, need not fear the price high. On the contrary, if the Swiss electricity industry can gold-plate the huge surpluses in Europe, it will have to fleece its customers in the supply monopolies less.
Ozone levels are rising and rising.
The heat wave is also causing ozone levels to rise massively. In the current year, ozone limits have been exceeded up to 800 times in Switzerland due to the high temperatures, the Federal Office for the Environment, Forests and Landscape reported on Tuesday. By mid-July, the limit values had already been exceeded more frequently at most measuring stations than during the whole of last year. In Ticino, the values were 520 times above the limit value. The frequency of limit value exceedances shows that further permanent measures are necessary. The air pollution control policy in Switzerland must be continued consistently, the Federal Office demands. Tier APSDA.
Tagesanzeiger Zurich, Wednesday, 16th July 2003.
No future for glacier.
Rome, Milan. By the end of this century, almost all glaciers worldwide could have melted if the climate warms by 4 degrees. This is the result of a study by the WWF. It was presented on Thursday on the occasion of the upcoming World Climate Conference in Milan. The consequences would be devastating, as glaciers store about 70% of the world's drinking water reserves, it said. The UN Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, IPCC, predicted a warming of 14 to 5.8 degrees. Particularly at risk are the countries of Ecuador, Peru, and Bolivia, where glaciers secure the drinking water supply all year round, as well as countries in the Himalayas. The rivers there, which are fed by glaciers, supply a third of the Earth's population with drinking water. Alaska also affected. According to the latest findings, the melting of glaciers in Alaska has progressed twice as fast in the past 5 to 7 years as in previous years, the report continued. The phenomenon has also reached threatening proportions in the Alps TA, 26.11. Esdia.
Tagesanzeiger Zurich, Friday, 28 November 2003.
With regard to the perma-ice, etc., everything is correct. Furthermore, the following has to be said. In the coming time, everything will become known, including state-ordered crimes against human beings used as medical, chemical, and biological test objects. This in particular with regard to chemical, biological, and nuclear weapons. However, human beings were also abused on a large scale as experimental objects for medical purposes, whereby in particular consciousness impaired and psychically impaired, as well as allegedly antisocial human beings, were brought in for this. However, this was not only common in America, but also in Japan, China, the USSR, France, Sweden, and Switzerland, and is still partly the case in certain countries, which is of course officially concealed in its entirety. Also for your homeland, Switzerland, an evil chapter must be written in this regard, especially with regard to psychiatric clinics and mental homes, as well as with regard to specific doctors who were not afraid of making experiments on human beings. Often children who were snatched from their allegedly antisocial families and hired out or deported to foster homes by so-called aid organizations. In addition, human beings suffering from psyche or consciousness disorders were maliciously maltreated, treated inhumanely, and sometimes effectively ill-treated to the death, also in Switzerland. And even today, even in Switzerland, there are still many inhumane conditions to deplore in this regard, and this will continue to be the case for some time to come. The majority of the responsible care personnel will, just as since time immemorial, only deal with the needy for the sake of profit, but not for the sake of the well-being of the human beings. As a consequence, they will not, or only in rare cases, also receive dignified and humane help.
A frightening foresight. But while we are at it, I would like to ask you again about the migraine disease. You once mentioned certain ailments that can cause migraines in particular. Can you tell me these factors again? There were probably 4 of them. Please? It would be important for various people to know what you have to explain about this.
It concerns jaw damage, jaw and jaw joint deformations, gingiva gum, inflammations and tooth damage, as well as tooth deformations, but also foot bone deformations and spinal column damage, as well as spinal column deformations. Stomach and intestinal diseases, etc., can also be triggers of migraine.
We once talked about the Loch Ness, that is Loch Ness in Scotland, in connection with the so-called Nessie, which is supposed to be a dinosaur, but for which no proof of existence could be provided until today. However, it was said by you that such an animal actually existed in Loch Ness, and that it would therefore not be a fairy tale. I would like to see the beast. Can you take me there sometime?
Predatory dinosaur fossil found.
London midsummer. Pickle time is Nessie's high season. But this time researchers are also not denying that remains of a real Loch Ness monster have turned up. However, its age is estimated at 150 million years. As the Daily Telegraph reported yesterday, a 67-year-old man stumbled across 4 fossilized vertebrae of a water-dwelling predatory dinosaur in shallow water. The plesiosaur, which was more than 10 meters long and had fins, a long neck and a small head, must have lived where Loch Ness is today, experts say. The plesiosaurus corresponds exactly to the image people have of the Loch Ness monster, Lyle Anderson said, curator at the Scottish National Museum in Edinburgh. The fossil has been found in Loch Ness, so you can now say that was the original monster. Nessie fans are treating the fossil as the first evidence of the monster's existence. The giant fish-eating reptile must have survived into our own time, they say.
Der Landboote Wintertour, Thursday, 17th July 2003.
In fact, there are 2 parent animals and 1 young animal. We are talking about predatory dinosaurs living in water, that is to say, plesiosaurus, which have prevailed for many generations. However, it will be very difficult to prove their existence because the animals rarely move to upper parts of water or even to the water surface in such a wise that they can be sighted. We have been observing these distant dinosaur descendants for many years, and in the course of our research, we have also found petrified fossils of their most distant ancestors, which we, however, left at the sites where we found them, where they may one day be found by earthly paleontologists or other Earth humans. Of course I will take you there so you can see the animals, but you will have to keep quiet about that to the public for the next 12 years.
I will. Even when I bring up further questions later on, I will pretend to be unknowing. Then let me turn to the volcano Vesuvius. The Brits bombarded the volcano crater in the last World War in order to inflict harm on the Hitler army by a volcanic eruption. An eruption occurred, which you said was only minor, but nevertheless caused considerable damage.
It was in fact only a small eruption, but it nevertheless produced a large lava flow that caused considerable damage. Thereby also larger parts of the city San Sebastian were destroyed. Fortunately, however, nothing else happened.
The last really big eruption, as far as I know, was in 1631. An eruption of about the same magnitude as when Pompeii was destroyed by an eruption of Vesuvius and buried under volcanic ash. Killing many human beings took place about 2,000 years before the Christian calendar, as you once said. The place or the area where everything was destroyed, what was its name? Nola or something? Human beings, you stated, were said not to have suffered much damage, if I remember correctly. And when did the Brits' bombardment take place, causing the volcano to erupt? Furthermore, I remember you said that the volcanic eruptions generally cause more photosynthesis, thereby neutralizing carbon dioxide floating in the air. Can you say more about this?
Nola, this is of rightness, that was the name. However, only a few human beings suffered damage to life and limb. In the month of March 1944. Since then, the vent of the volcano is closed by a huge lava slag plug. However, this plug will become even stronger and denser in the year 2000, because then there will be an earthquake in the Vesuvius area, which, as we know from a foresight of the future, will lead to the strengthening and densification. For the time being, this will prevent the volcano from erupting, whereby the prevention will only last as long as the slag plug can withstand the pressure from below, which arises from the large magma mass of 523 square kilometers, which extends 8 to 10 kilometers in depth and even deeper beneath the city of Rome. If, however, larger masses of water or gas enter the magma sea, which reside underground, a tremendous explosion will immediately occur, the enormous pressure of which will partly melt the plug and eject the rest out of the vent, causing the volcano, which also has deep connections with the volcanoes Stromboli and Etna, to erupt. Vesuvius is constantly in motion and internally active, as well as very unpredictable and therefore dangerous. Regarding the photosynthesis, during volcanic eruptions, volcanic aerosols cause scattering of the incident sunlight, which greatly reduces its irradiation. During this process, however, the share of diffuse light is also increased. In the same way, cloud cover and haze can also create an increase in photosynthesis. When looking at the leaves of trees, shrubs, herbs, and flowers, as well as the surfaces of all plants, it can be seen from these that the radiation incident on them may well be reduced, but at the same time the shadow areas occurring in clear weather conditions become better illuminated. This increases the amount of light that can be used for photosynthesis, as well as the total irradiated surface of leaves and plants.
Italy's second Pompeii.
2,000 years before the fall of the Roman city, an eruption of Vesuvius completely buried the village of Nola, an archaeological sensation. By Genevieve Lucia. The footprints in the soft clay soil are still visible today. The farmers of Nola must have hurriedly run back and forth to gather up the most important and valuable things. From Vesuvius, a black cloud raced towards them with thunder and lightning. Ash rained down, the first pumice chunks hailed from the sky. We don't know if they made it. At least they managed to escape from the village, because unlike in Pompeii, archaeologists in Nola did not find any human victims of the catastrophe that occurred here in the European. Early Bronze Age between the years 1900 and 1700 BC, almost 2,000 years before the sinking of Pompeii. Only a few penned goats, a dog and quite a few mice perished miserably. Nola lies about 12 kilometers northeast of Vesuvius on the edge of a fertile plain sea map P. 46. The volcanic eruption, known among specialists as Pomici di Avellino because it moved in the direction of the present-day town of Avellino, must have unleashed a similar force to the one that destroyed Pompeii. Both times, the magma built up in the volcano blew the lava plug kilometers high into the air with a powerful detonation. Hot gases shot out of the Earth's fissure, sweeping away shards of lava and boulders. A huge, columnar cloud rose and was then driven away by the wind. In 79 D, the wind blew from the northwest to the sea, but 2,000 years earlier it blew from the southwest, which meant that the devastating rainfall extended far inland, precisely in the direction of Avellino. A dense hailstorm of increasingly large rocks, lasting 6 to 8 hours, buried the village under a layer of pumice up to 1.3 meters high. This first phase of destruction was followed by a second, so-called hydromagmatic phase, in which gaseous rock encountered water-bearing layers in the volcanic vent. In Nola, this second precipitation settled in the form of a thick, almost cooled ash slurry that slowly penetrated the abandoned houses. A fine shower of ash finally settled over the dead landscape like a grey shroud. The bleating of the goats had long since ceased. Life frozen in stone. The excavations, led by Claude Albor Lividi and Giuseppe Vecchio, had begun as they usually do. A shopping centre was to be built on the approximately 1,000 square metre site. During the trial soundings, the archaeologists came across strange structures at a depth of 6 meters, which they were only able to interpret over time. They had uncovered remains of a village from the Bronze Age. Soon the researchers realized that they had made a sensational discovery. The huts had been preserved up to a height of 1.3 meters in the negative of volcanic mud. Inside the houses, which were all completely filled with hardened mud up to the same height, everything was still in place. Inorganic things like ceramics in the original. Organic things like wood, on the other hand, had passed away and left their imprint in the negative. It took a while for the archaeologists to understand what had happened here. They had discovered a kind of Bronze Age Pompeii. With the greatest of care, they dug down layer by layer and uncovered a total of 3 buildings along with the surrounding area. The almost perfect state of preservation could be explained as follows. The wooden frames of the huts had withstood the first eruption phase, the hail of pumice, and had not collapsed. Only one side wall had, fortunately, given way and fallen into the house at its full height. It was this wall that allowed the archaeologists to determine the former height of the building, which was an impressive 5 meters. So, while the stones were pelting down from the sky outside, the inside of the hut remained untouched. Only in the second, the hydromagmatic phase, did the fine mud slowly penetrate centimeter by centimeter, filling every cavity, no matter how small, every crack, tipping over empty vessels or pressing them against the wall. Heavier pots remained where the human beings had last placed them. After Vesuvius had calmed down again, only the gables of the houses in the village must have been visible. They crumbled over time. And over the centuries, all the enclosed organic materials such as wood, straw, and leather also rotted away. Leather. In the surrounding volcanic mud, new cavities and perfect imprints were created, which archaeologists are meticulously trying to document today. Huge grain silo. All the houses had the same long oval ground plan with a straight narrow side to the southeast, where the entrance had also been. The largest building measured 9 by 15 meters. The tent-like roof was thatched and reached down to the ground. Before entering the house, one passed through an open covered vestibule where baskets of provisions were waiting. One very large basket contained half a calf. Inside the house, right next to the entrance, was a huge grain silo. Deeper in the room, a round fireplace had been set up on the floor, and a small oven stood nearby. Around the fireplace lay the dishes from the last meal. Apparently, the people huddled on the floor and ate from a bowl placed on a clay stand about 30 centimeters high. There were smaller stands for children. In the oven opening was a pitcher to keep the food warm. The contents of the eating bowls and jug are still awaiting analysis. The archaeologists could not find any other furniture. The fugitives had probably taken mats and blankets for sleeping with them. Tools were also missing. Above all, apart from 2 awls, no bronze objects were found. Weapons and tools made of bronze were very valuable and were therefore not left behind. The rearmost rounded part of the house was separated by a board wall. Here was the storage room, where various containers were stacked on wooden racks. Some contained flour, others almonds or ears of grain. Meat, shoofly from pigs and sheep, was hung on beams to dry. The largest hut had an area of well over 100 square meters, and archaeologists do not consider it impossible that it had some kind of upper floor, a gallery. But the fact that there was always only one hearth leads them to assume that a single large family lived in each house. The houses were each surrounded by a fence. Other fenced areas served as cattle pens and threshing floors. A water hole and 2 wells provided fresh water. In a small pen behind the huts, the farmers had locked up 9 highly pregnant goats. They would have been too much of a burden to escape, so they were left to their fate. The same fate befell a small dog that had sought shelter under the roof and probably suffocated. Already stillborn, on the other hand, were 2 human fetuses, one of 4.5 months and one of 6 months, which had been buried behind the houses in a broken clay jar. First archaeobotanical analyses show that the farmers mainly cultivated barley, possibly also fig and almond trees already. Mushrooms, acorns, kernels of olives and almonds testify to other food crops. The identification of the charred wood provides clues for the reconstruction of an environment that was apparently dominated by beech trees. Fern fronds and oak leaves, whose perfect imprints were preserved in the soil, were most likely to have served as animal food. The evaluation work is in full swing and will certainly take years. The discovery of 3-dimensionally preserved dwellings is undoubtedly one of the most important in recent years and will be a milestone for Bronze Age research. Like a snapshot, it captures the long-gone moment of a human drama. And surely one day this image will be so sharp that we will even be able to make out what the human beings were about to eat before they were driven into flight by a deafening explosion.
NZZ am Sonntag Zurich, 3. August 2003.
This is not only important for the plants, trees, and their leaves in the open landscape, but also in the forests. And indeed, in fact, volcanic eruptions around the world produce very significant increases in aerosol levels in the atmosphere, thereby significantly reducing atmospheric carbon dioxide levels, as is also the case with long-term cloud cover and haze. The aerosol concentration in the atmosphere is therefore very important for the reduction of the worldwide carbon dioxide cycle.
Then a question regarding all sorts of poisons, gases, and hormones that the human being emits into wastewater, releases into water, air, and landscapes. You said that these poisons, including radioactive substances and heavy metals, cause fish, birds, animals, insects, and worms, etc., to fall ill with cancer, tumors, and ulcers, to fall victim to mutations, and also to lose their ability to reproduce. I also talked about this with my family doctor, Dr. Flaxman. He explained that in the aforementioned regard, the drugs and the contraceptive pill, that is to say their excretory products which get into the sewage, are also part of it. However, this would not only be the case by human beings, but also by mammals which were administered such substances.
Study reveals farmed salmon contaminated with cancer toxin.
Washington, Zurich. Farmed salmon can be contaminated with dangerous toxins. Dioxins, polychlorinated biphenyls, PCBs, and hexachlorobenzene have been found in farmed salmon, substances that are among the most toxic of all. They can cause cancer, nerve damage, and immune system disorders. Breeding farms in Scotland and the Faroe Islands have come under fire. They feed the salmon fish meal that is rich in harmful substances. This is why Atlantic farmed salmon is significantly more contaminated with the toxins than Pacific wild salmon. This is the result of the study by U.S. researcher Ronald Heitz, which he presented in the magazine Science. What do cantonal chemists and Swiss salmon suppliers have to say about the results? We examine salmon on a random basis. So far, we have not found any serious deficiencies with regard to chlorinated hydrocarbons, says Zurich cantonal chemist Bruno Pacciarelli. Migros is not aware of the study, says spokesman Urs Neff. So far, there have been no complaints. Coop imports salmon mainly from Norway and Ireland, and very little from Scotland. It is also declared precisely, says spokesman Karl Weisskopf. For the Federal Office of Public Health, the findings are not new. However, the limits that apply in Switzerland are also complied with in the case of farmed salmon. Helmut Oriensieg.
Blick, Zurich, Saturday, 10th of January 2004.
Fewer fish because of too many birth control pills.
Berlin. Because a large number of German women take the contraceptive pill, fish in Germany are now having reproductive worries. The hormones in the pill enter wastewater via excretions and from there return to the water cycle, said Andreas Truge, president of the German Federal Environment Agency UBA. In this way, the contraceptive pills indirectly weakened reproduction in the waters. Numerous medicines also enter the water via this cycle and pollute the animals. Environmentally friendly selection criteria in the development of active substances could reduce the threat to water bodies in the future, the UBA warned. Reuters.
Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Wednesday, 23rd July 2003.
Poison in farmed salmon.
According to a new study, farmed salmon contains around 10 times more environmental toxins than wild salmon science. Volern 303 p. 154. The scientists led by Ronald Heitz of Indiana University in Bloomington analyzed around 700 samples for 50 different toxins, including salmon from European and American supermarkets and directly from farms. Salmon from northern European farms in Scotland and the Faroe Islands contained the highest levels of environmental toxins such as dioxin and chlorinated hydrocarbons PBCs. The researchers blame this on fish feed, which often contains contaminated fish oil. The British Food Standards Agency protested against the science study, pointing out that the pollutants in farmed salmon are below the international limits.
NZZ am Sonntag, Zurich, 11th January 2004.
Then again, something else. You once spoke about the fact that our SOL system is arranged very far outside in a spiral arm of our galaxy, while our solar system would not constantly remain at the same place, and would therefore also interfere with other spiral arms of the Milky Way, or pass through them. Thereby, our whole Sol system, thus also the Earth, would increasingly be hit by large quantities of cosmic substances of all kinds, which would lead to climate changes. Can you give me any more information on that?
Are the spiral arms of the galaxy making the Earth freeze?
Beat, according to two scientists, a statistical evaluation of astronomical and climatological data as well as isotope profiles of meteorites from the last 500 million years suggests that at least 2/3 of the warm and cold phases on Earth are controlled by fluctuations in cosmic radiation. They see the orbit of our solar system within the Milky Way as the trigger for the fluctuations. If the Sun, and with it, the Earth move through a spiral arm of the galaxy, which is supposed to happen about every 143 million years, more particles hit the atmosphere, according to the scientists. This leads to more clouds and thus to cooling. If cosmic radiation decreases, it becomes warmer. Carbon dioxide CO2, on the other hand, has a smaller effect according to the analyses. If they prove to be correct, this would also have consequences for climate forecasts. According to the two researchers, the temperature increase associated with a doubling of CO2 concentrations would be smaller than assumed by most climatologists today. Source: Geolog. Sodive of America Today, 7J 4-10, 2003.
Neue Zürcher Zeitung NZZ, Zurich, Wednesday, 23rd July, 2003.
Mysterious climate cycles.
The dramatic climate changes of the last ice age could be of extraterrestrial origin. New data from Greenlandic ice aging schemes provide indications of this. Scientists from the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research (PIAG) discovered a cycle with high regularity. Over a period of about 35,000 years, the Earth warmed every 1,470 years. No fluctuation within the Earth system could be so regular, says Stefan Rahmstorff of PIK. Rahmstorff suspects the reason for the fluctuations to be, for example, changes in the Earth's orbit around the Sun. The climate of the last ice age showed unusual capers. Within 1 to 2 decades, the Earth warmed up by up to 10 degrees Celsius. These warm phases then usually lasted for several centuries. This happened more than 20 times during the Ice Age 10,000 years ago. Scientists speak of Dansgaard-Oeschger events. According to the prevailing theory, warm Atlantic water that advanced into the Greenland Sea and the European North Sea was responsible for the warming. But what triggered the current change in each case is still unclear. Mel.
Tagesanzeiger Zurich, Tuesday, 27th May 2003.
Certainly, several times I have spoken about cosmic influences causing climatic changes on the Earth and thus also on all structures in the entire Sol system. These cosmic substances, as you call them, are tiny and tiniest particles, that is to say, cosmic rays of various kinds, and these also have a climatological effect on the Earth. Namely, if it gets increasingly hit by these cosmic substances or rays, when a tangling with a spiral arm is given, then an atmospheric cooling takes place on the planet. On the other hand, atmospheric warming on the Earth arises when the cosmic particles dilute and the radiation hence becomes weaker. However, not only the cold and warm periods, and thus the climatic conditions depend to a large extent on this radiation, but also to a large extent the weather constellations. And this is because the galactic radiation is among other things also responsible for the so-called jet streams, of which there are one in the southern and one in the northern hemisphere, whereby I am, however, now talking about the northern one. We are talking here about a planet-wide, very strong, extremely intense, band-shaped, unstable airflow that moves from west to east at a high speed ranging from about 150 to more than 600 kilometers per hour, and namely in the upper troposphere up to the stratosphere. When there are no clouds, the jet stream is subject to a very strong turbulence, and in the transition area between subtropical warm air masses and polar cold air masses, which is called the frontal zone, the jet stream is associated with strong horizontal pressure gradients and temperature gradients, that is to say, with increases and decreases. To explain it a little more precisely, the jet stream passes along a horizontal axis, the so-called jet stream axis, and is centered in the upper troposphere or lower stratosphere, whereby the whole thing is caused by large horizontal temperature differences. Normally, the jet stream has a span of several thousand kilometers in length and has a width of several hundred kilometers, while the vertical spread is only a few kilometers. The northern jet stream is not constant and also roams from south to north and from north to south, as does the southern jet stream, which roams likewise. Hence, the jet stream is also responsible for the weather conditions, which means that it also triggers severe weather of all kinds, such as torrential and prolonged rainfall, storms, hurricanes, typhoons, and tornadoes.
8 dead from hurricanes in the U.S. Midwest.
The death toll has risen to 8 following severe hurricanes in the U.S. Midwest. All 8 victims were buried under the rubble of a century-old diner in the Illinois town of Utica. SDA. Residents of mobile homes had sought refuge from the hurricanes in the basement of the building, Mayor Fred Esmond announced on Wednesday. Tragically, they would have survived if they had stayed in their trailers, he said. The storms cut a swathe of devastation, with houses covered and even heavy trucks overturned. 51 tornadoes had swept across Illinois, Indiana, and Iowa on Tuesday, according to meteorologists. Parts of Illinois were declared a disaster area.
Source, WW2. Blue Wind. Wednesday, 22nd April 2004.
Has Frau Hole gone crazy?
A winter onset led to massive traffic obstructions in eastern Switzerland. Bessening is not in sight until tomorrow. By Maria Lorenzetti. St. Gallen. At the last harmless snowfall, people in a group of winter haters were still joking late at night, assuming that for every winter there was a providentially determined but unknown to man amount of snow to fall, then actually every snowfall would be welcome, even after the beginning of spring. For with every flake, the probability of being caught cold by further adversity would decrease. At some point, it would snow out. The philosophizing turned out to be what it is, self-deceiving nonsense. The proof was provided yesterday by the snowfalls that hit mainly the Appenzell region and parts of the canton of St. Gallen, and may have caused even the most nature-loving weather hobbyists to hate. Even the St. Gallen cantonal police could not refrain from asking the reproachful question in their press release whether Frau Holle had actually gone berserk. It had been snowing continuously since Tuesday evening. According to meteorologists, 40 centimeters of new snow fell overnight alone. Derailed railcar combined with the snowfall, which did not let up during the day. A blanket of snow was created that overtaxed traffic and snow-clearing vehicles. For example, along the Trogan Railway, the tracks run directly next to the connecting road to St. Gallen, so the space for snow piles is very, very limited on some stretches. This meant that the masses of snow that were pushed away from the road came to rest too close to the railway track, and the piles of the rail-clearing vehicle in turn clogged the road. According to reports, this led to some nasty exchanges between road-clearing vehicle drivers and rail-cutter drivers. A railcar derailed because the fresh snow blocked a switch. The accidents on the road were numerous, but mostly went smoothly. In the city of St. Gallen, dozens of cars were towed away because they obstructed snow removal. The consistency of the snow proved to be particularly treacherous. Wet and heavy, it clumped on roads and rails to form a concrete-like mass. The snow felled several trees. Forestry offices warned against driving and walking in the forest. According to forecasts, the weather is not expected to improve before Friday. Search for rubbish sacks, by the way. The St. Gallen Refuse Collection Service also had to give in because of the onset of winter. In some places, the rubbish bags were simply not to be found under the snow. The waste will be collected in the next few days, the Civil Engineering Office announced confidently. After all, it does snow out at some point.
Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Thursday, 25th March 2004.
Aha, that's interesting. What time periods do these phases encompass that bring cosmic, that is to say, galactic heat and cold periods? Is there a certain regularity, or are the phases appearing chaotically? And to what extent are the Earth and the Sun influenced by the galactic radiation? To be more precise, one probably should speak of a galactic radiation, of galactic substances, particles and swinging waves, because these, at least for the most part, are not really cosmic, but originate from our galaxy. Concerning particles, photons are after all light particles and must therefore also have a mass and a weight, because this is the only way spaceships with photon propulsion can function, right?
The sun has a fever.
Researchers explain what is really behind the climate shock Zurich. Climate experts are shaking up a taboo. Is the climate shock really man-made? Or is the Earth only getting warmer because the sun has a fever, its atomic oven is getting hotter and hotter, and is thus heating up the Earth? Climate expert Ulrich Kubasch is convinced the sun is heating up the Earth. The sun is currently the hottest topic among climatologists, confirms Ulrich Kubasch of the German Climate Computing Center in Hamburg. Many climate experts are now convinced that it is not only mankind with its carbon dioxide CO2 emissions that is responsible for the greenhouse effect, but above all the sun. It heats us up much more today than it did 100 years ago. A finding confirmed by the Heidelberg geophysicist Ulrich Neff, carbon dioxide's claim to be the sole explanation for global warming is crumbling. He published a study in the research magazine Nature that admits the sun has a far greater influence on the climate than previously assumed. The fact is, the sun is not a constant source of radiation. Sometimes it sends more, sometimes less radiation to Earth. The luminosity of the Sun rises and falls in a 200-year rhythm, and with it, its surface temperature of around 5,500 degrees. If the Sun has a fever, this has dramatic consequences for the Earth, because the temperatures here also rise. This was shown by research conducted by the Federal Institute for Geosciences in Hanover, Germany. Even a few degrees more on the sun heat up the greenhouse effect, warns U.S. climate researcher Bob Carpenter of Ohio State University. The greenhouse effect occurs because water vapor and carbon dioxide retain the sun's heat on Earth, instead of releasing some of it back into space. Scientists still lack exact data. For what exactly goes on in the seething sun when huge eruptions suddenly erupt? Even today, we researchers still don't quite get it, says expert Neff. Data on the Sun, its surface area is 11,930 times that of Earth, which measures 510.1 million kilometers. 3 million Earth spheres fit inside the Sun. SIC weighs 398,899 times as much as Earth, which weighs 5974 trillion tons. It is about 149.6 million kilometers from Earth. Its diameter is 1.39 million kilometers. The surface temperature of the Sun is 5,500 degrees, while that of the Sun's corona is up to 2 million degrees. Every second, the Sun converts 564 million tons of hydrogen into helium. Nevertheless, since its formation around 4.5 billion years ago, it has only used up just under 3% of its hydrogen reserves. Surprisingly, darkest night reigns in the interior of the Sun. The reason, SIC produces gamma radiation here that is invisible to the eye.
Blick, Zurich, Wednesday, 15th October 2003.
Chinese weigh light.
Peking, how much does light weigh? Chinese researchers can now say exactly 1.2. 51 grams is the weight of a single light particle photon, a number with 50 zeros after the decimal point. For their weighing experiment, the researchers led by Jun Luo from Huazhong University of Science and Technology in Wuhan, China, aimed a sharp laser beam at a precisely ground mirror. The mirror hung in a vacuum tube on a thread and was rotated by the light particles of the laser beam. This showed that the number of revolutions of the mirror directly indicates the weight of a photon. After the experiment was completed, the researchers were able to prove that a single photon weighs more than a single photon in a vacuum tube. A single photon weighs 0.00010 day. (0.12 grams at rest). The Chinese scientists were thus able to increase the measurement accuracy by a factor of 20 compared to previous experiments. Their findings have implications for physics as well as for calculating the structure and age of the entire universe. Helmut O'Gryan-Schick.
Blick, Zurich, Thursday, 2nd October 2003.
Cosmic means universal. Galactic is referring to the galaxy. The radiation is a galactic one. But keep listening. The Sun is strongly influenced by the radiation, whereby enormous eruptions develop on it and its temperature rises. This also has an impact on the Earth and plays a role in climate change. The phases of change of the sun and the galactic radiation are rhythmic in a certain way, although small deviations may occur there. As such, the most important individual phases of the sun and the galaxy last 3, 7, 11, and gradually up to 200 and even several hundred and several thousand, and even up to 138 and 250 million years. The influence of galaxy radiation on the sun and the Earth, as well as on the SOL system, is thereby very large, because at least 50% of the cold and warm periods on Earth are due to the fluctuations of galaxy radiations and their influence on the sun. Regarding the photons, of course, these also have a mass and a weight, but in a changing form. The present-day weight is 1.252 gram.
This means that the great rhythms of the sun's eruptions also play an enormous role in the Earth's climate, which, however, is logical. So all this has therefore also something to do with the coming and already in the making global climate change, by which worldwide many earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, tremendous tempests, floods, droughts, enormous fire bursts and forest fires, immense avalanches, landslides, tremendous snowfalls, typhoons, hurricanes and other storms, etc. will appear. As you said, however, the phases themselves are also fluctuating in nature, so that both cold and warm periods can alternate. And while we are at it, do you know when we can finally expect a real summer with real summer temperatures again? You know, similar to the way they still used to be when I was a boy? In 1947, there was a hot summer with 47 degrees warmth, as I recall, when the fruit trees were in bloom twice and yielded fruit twice, which one could also harvest in small parts. The railway tracks bent because of the heat. The land was dry and sunburned and deep cracks in the ground. The Rhine falls were practically dried up, and shipping on the Rhine came to a standstill due to a lack of water. Many streams dried up, and springs ran dry, while the glaciers melted on a large scale. But apparently there are no records of this with our meteorologists. I do not know why either. Also today, no one speaks any more of the fact that after the large cold wave, during which all of Central Europe and also Canada, etc. suffered in the month of February 1947, whereby also the Niagara Falls turned to ice. From the middle of April to October 1947, not a single drop of rain fell, after which then, after the end of the dry season, during which many forest fires were taking place, and no garden was allowed to be irrigated anymore by order of the authorities. Enormous tempests came down on the land, and hailstorms have stripped half the forests bare, whereby many thousands of deaths due to heat were also to be mourned all over Europe. Then in September, several typhoons and hurricanes raged across the USA and Japan, whereby I remember that in the news and newspapers it was mentioned that about 2,500 human beings lost their life. And in the newspapers as well as on the radio, it was also said that there was a great famine in Germany. Switzerland too had problems with the drought, since because of the scarcity of water in rivers and reservoirs, electricity had to be saved. As I recall, it was not possible to buy electricity abroad, and in order to add insult to the evil, Switzerland was caught in an enormous economic crisis. I could still mention a lot more about worldwide events in 1947, because it was the year of my 10th birthday, which provided me with many memories. It is a mystery to me that everything is supposed to be forgotten, and that there are no records of all the events of the time of heat. In fact, however, I can remember that the cold wave, which began as early as December 1946, also caused a minus of more than 30 degrees in Switzerland. In contrast, it was cold everywhere in the southern countries when the heat wave paralyzed everything in the north. And I also remember that all the asphalt roads were melted because of the heat, and we had tar on our bare feet all the time because we children walked barefoot. In post-war Germany, the cold was particularly severe for the human beings because they had no burnable material for their heaters, which is why they stole tons of coal in order not to freeze to death. Nonetheless, many human beings died because of the cold in different parts of Germany. Also, the Rhine was frozen. Beside many lakes and other rivers, therefore also the shipping came to a standstill as well as parts of the air traffic, which had to be stopped due to ice and large amounts of snow. Then in March, the snow and ice masses thawed, while also a long-lasting strong and often torrential rain began, whereby large floods developed European-wide. In addition to these things, I can also remember a peculiarity that caused a lot of excitement, namely when Thor Heyerdahl crossed the Pacific with his balsa wood raft from Peru and arrived in Polynesia. However, in 1947 there was also a cholera epidemic in Egypt that cost thousands of lives, as I remember.
In response to all your questions and explanations, here is what I have to say. The 50% I mentioned are directly related to this, which means that we can speak of a naturalness to this extent. The other 50%, however, are attributable to the fault of the humankind of Earth.
A Hot Summer by Silvano Learman, Switzerland.
After many years, we had once again a normal, wonderful summer in 2003. The way this summer turned out to be, I experienced most of the summer times both in my childhood and in my young manhood, until the summers suddenly became ever shorter, colder, and wetter. And now, in this year 2003, again a summer like in former times, long, dry, and hot. A summer of the century. Record heat, furnace. It sounded from all sides during all the weeks and months of this summer. For my part, however, I can somehow remember equal and sometimes even hotter summers. Or did I simply have a hotter sensation of temperature back then? However, I cannot remember the degrees shown on the thermometer, but I kept hearing from Billy that in 1947 the summer heat amounted to as many degrees as the century had years, thus 47 degrees. Curious for answers and temperature figures, I therefore kept repeatedly listening around everywhere, both to acquaintances, but also to old people who must have experienced the summer of 1947 too. And lo and behold, I found what I was looking for. From many respondents, 5 individuals, independent of each other in different places, confirmed to me that they could remember a much hotter summer, namely the summer of 1947, which would have been the hottest summer of the 20th century. On one occasion, I sat together with Billy over a coffee in the Freihof restaurant in Schmidrudi and conversed with someone in his old age about earlier hot summers. Thus he told me about the record summer of 1947, which would have shown temperatures that in degrees would have had just as many as the century had years, namely 47 degrees. So he confirmed Billy's testimony. A very old man in Wetzikon, a former farmer's son, who was able to remember temperatures of 45 to 47 degrees in the summer of 1947, told me something similar to this guest. Also, an old farmer in our surroundings, the Perg, was able to remember high temperatures of the summer of 1947, whereby he spoke of at least 45 degrees, which he had read off the thermometer at that time. Furthermore, an elderly friend of my mother told me that in the summer of 1947, the temperatures in many places in Switzerland were 47 degrees Celsius. The father of a passive member expressed himself to me in a similar way. So, we probably did not have a record summer in 2003, because not anywhere in Switzerland was there enough for 47 degrees Celsius, as the summer temperature in 1947 had been, according to explanations given to me by several old persons who, independently of each other, probably could not all be mistaken.
Yes, your assumption is therefore correct. Regarding a real summer, as you say, and your observation that in 1947 up to 47-degree warmth did occur in many parts of Europe, I can do no other than confirm it, because from that time I have records made by Svath, which prove your words, namely also in relation to the other things you mentioned. The fact that the meteorologists have no exact chronological records about it is not incomprehensible and not surprising, because at that time, on the one hand, only very deficient and furthermore very faulty records were made, as it was still customary since decades at that time, and on the other hand, only at very specific places measurements were carried out, as unfortunately is still the case today. This is evident from our accurate and correct records. Accurate data will only be obtained if exact measurements are made nationwide. Furthermore, at earlier times, incorrectly calibrated temperature measuring instruments were used to make overall temperature mismeasurements with regard to cold and heat. But not only that, in earlier times the mistake was also made that the temperature measuring instruments were installed in shady shelters, by which the radiation of the sun was held off or at least very strongly refracted, whereby inevitably mismeasurements up to 8 degrees came off.
40.3 degrees measured, but where?
Zurich, Bern, Berlin. Temperature measurements can be strongly distorted by radiation. According to international standards, the measurement must therefore be taken 2 meters above the ground surface, namely above a mown meadow, as Meteo Schweiz made clear in a statement. Location is decisive. Meteo Schweiz was indirectly reacting to a measurement taken by Jörg Kachelmann's Meteomedia last Tuesday in Mölln AG, which indicated a new record value of 40.3 degrees TA of 7.8. The head of weather at Meteo Schweiz, Jacques Ambule, pointed out on request that it was quite conceivable that a perfectly calibrated device could currently indicate heat of over 40 degrees. The reason for this could be, for example, a location that is too close to a built-up surface. To protect the thermometer against radiation, weather huts were built in the past to keep out most of the radiation. Today, modern measuring stations are equipped with ventilated thermometers. The air is sucked in through a tube at about 5 meters per second. This practically eliminates the influence of radiation. The surroundings should also be as free as possible from sealed surfaces, Meteo Schweiz continues to write. If, for example, there is a large tarred car park, railway ballast, or an industrial area 20 meters away from the meadow, then this measurement is not representative. In this case, the temperature can be more than 2 degrees higher than in an unsurfaced area due to the large heating of the artificial surfaces. New highs again. Meteo Schweiz's 34 measuring stations recorded August highs again on Friday. In Basel, for example, it was again 37.0 degrees. Geneva recorded 36.0 degrees and Cloton 35.3 degrees. In Germany, the heat record since measurements began in 1901 in Saarland was broken with 40.8 degrees. APSDA.
Tagesanzeiger Zurich, Saturday, 9th August 2003.
A further factor of the mismeasurements was that measurement data were not determined at the correct height from the ground. That is to say, not at 5, 10, 15, and 25, as well as at 160 centimeters height, whereby the ground should have been lightly overgrown with grass or covered with leaves, etc. A further measurement should have taken place at the same height above tilled land, that is to say, on plowland, and a further measurement point would have been necessary in buildings with closed windows and doors. Another mistake has been made, which is still the case today, that temperatures have not been measured in the above-mentioned heights, on areas covered with asphalt and concrete, as well as in villages and cities, nor in forests, nor in the shade and on the roofs of buildings, which is why there have always been enormous erroneous results, as is still the case today.
Heat dispute city temperature is measured on land.
Zurich. Flying 2 meters above mown meadows, far from civilization? No, the Swiss weather measuring stations do. The dispute over temperatures is more heated than ever this hot summer. Meteorologists' measurements diverge widely. And this despite the fact that the measuring stations are only a few kilometers apart. How do the differences come about? How are temperatures measured in the first place? The standard of the World Meteorological Organization is that temperatures are measured at a height of 2 meters above a mown meadow. In addition, the measurement location must be free of sealed surfaces, houses, car parks, etc. With such strict measurement regulations, it is clear that we often perceive the temperatures as higher than the stated values. Houses, streets, and large squares store the heat. Jörg Kachelmann, 45, of Meteomedia AG gives an example. Meteo Schweiz measures the temperature for the city of Basel somewhere on a green hill in the canton of Basel-Land. Frank Krauser, 40, of Meteo Schweiz counters our measuring stations correspond to the international standard. Measurements from cities are not representative. Kachelmann, we measure where it is important for human beings. In Switzerland, the density of the measuring network is third world level. Peter Wick, 37, of Meteo News also says, "It is high time that the measuring network is expanded with stations in the cities." But the expansion of the Meteo Schweiz measuring network is stalling. For example, only Meteomedia has a measuring station on the meadow near the Zurich National Museum. Martin Prader.
Blick, Zurich, Monday, 11th August 2003.
All the values mentioned are always important. Namely, the temperatures in the open landscape, the temperatures in villages and cities and in built-up areas, but also the temperatures in the shadows of buildings and in forests. These measured values must be stated separately, through which only then an overall picture of the temperatures emerges. And what is really meant by this is the total value and not an average value. The range of all values serves the correct overview, while the individual values show clearly discernible data for the respective places and areas. The so-called general temperature is the actual value of all measurements at all the measurement heights mentioned, whereby there must be one overall measurement station per 10 square kilometers. This is the only way to ensure a correct temperature measurement. Unfortunately, this is still not done in this manner today, and will not be done for some time in the future, which is why there will continue to be no precise temperature control. And the reason why, in many cases, there are no records of natural events is that little or nothing was reported in the public media, nor in meteorological records or other annals.
Even more heat days in the future.
The number of hot days in Europe will continue to increase. This is shown by a Swiss study. Some like it, others moan, the heat. June this year was the hottest month since measuring stations were set up in Switzerland. And if climatologists are to be believed, the heat record may even be beaten in the next few decades. A study by the University of Fribourg shows that the number of days with a daily maximum temperature of over 30 degrees Celsius is likely to increase significantly by the end of this century horizons. Vol. 57. As part of the National Centre of Competence in Research Climate, the Freiburg scientists are investigating how strongly global warming will affect the frequency of extreme events. For their analyses, the scientists use simulations from the Danish Meteorological Institute. The high-resolution regional model enables more precise estimates than global simulations. The Hiram model calculates with a grid of 50 kilometers. Global models have a resolution of 150 kilometers. Energy waster. Air conditioning. If the frequency of the experienced hot spell increases in the future, this is likely to significantly increase energy consumption. According to an EU study, more and more room air conditioners are found in households, tourist establishments, offices, and small businesses in Europe. In 1996, about 74 million air conditioners were in use in the EU. This corresponds to an additional electricity consumption of about 3 million households. The authors assume that by 2010, about 21 million air conditioners will be in operation across Europe. By 2020, even 33 million. The scientists warn, if no more economical technology is developed for air conditioners in the future, the total energy consumption will more than double by 2010. By 2020, according to the researchers, the consumption could even increase to 4 times the 1996 level. ML.
Tagesanzeiger, Zurich, Tuesday, 1st July 2003.